Okay, picking up with book 13 of the Odyssey, and we're going to go through these last books through book 24. Probably will be somewhat quickly, and we'll skip quite a few passages. Book 13. So Odysseus is sailed by the Phaeacians, and they return him to Ithaca. Notice they put him in the boat, and he falls asleep immediately, and then all of his treasures are loaded aboard. They sail him, drop him off at Ithaca, deposit his treasure and such. And we're told on page 290, beginning lines 142 and following, Poseidon appeals to Zeus. And he says, 144 or so, Zeus, Father, I will lose all my honor now among the immortals. Now there are mortal men who show me no respect. Phaeacians too, born of my own loins. I said myself that Odysseus would suffer long and hard before he made it home, but I never dreamed of blocking his return, not absolutely at least, once you had pledged your word and bowed your head. Poseidon's telling us he was going to do everything he could to delay Odysseus's, sorry for the shakiness of the video, to delay the return of Odysseus, but he wasn't going to ultimately deny the return. Okay, so Zeus replies to Poseidon, top of 291, lines 158 and following, and says the gods don't disrespect you, what a stir there'd be. He says the power is yours to do what you want, whatever warms your heart. And Poseidon tells them what he's going to do. He's going to put essentially a ring of stone around the island of the Phaeacians, so that nobody else can essentially ever ask their aid again and ever get any help from them. He's going to freeze the Phaeacian boat, turn it to stone when it comes into harbor, and that's what we see happen. And Alcinous on page 292, when they see the boat racing into view, he says around line 195 or so, "Oh no, my father's prophecy years ago, it all comes home to me with a vengeance now. He used to say Poseidon was vexed with us because we escorted all mankind and never came to grief. He said that one day as a well-built ship of ours sailed home on the misty sea from such a convoy, the god would crush it, yes, and pile a huge mountain round about our port to keep anybody else from being able to come in and ask for aid." Okay? And at the moment that Poseidon does that to the Phaeacian ship and blocks their port forever, that's when Odysseus wakes up. And notice he immediately assumes that the Phaeacians have tricked him in some way. We're told 293, line 227 or so, 228. Odysseus cried in anguish, man of misery, whose land have I lit on now? What are they here? Violent, savage, lawless? And then he goes on and talks about what he's going to do with his treasure. And picking up 238, he says, so damn those lords and captains, these Phaeacians. Not entirely honest or upright, were they? Sweeping me off to this no man's land. And they swore they'd sail me home. He thinks they violated those laws of Xenia, those laws of hospitality. They promised they would take him home. He thinks they just, took him to the nearest beach and dropped him off, essentially, right? And he starts to wonder, did they take any of my treasure? Counts it all out. It's all still there. Athena comes and shows up to him and tells him that he's in Ithaca and such, okay? And he's filled with joy. Page 295, Phoenicia, the Phoenicians are alluded to, and the town of Sidon, which is on the coast of modern-day modern-day Lebanon. That's the Sidon of Tyre and Sidon that is mentioned in the Gospels. And what's interesting here is that it's from the Phoenicians that the Greeks derived their alphabet. And our alphabet that we use today, ultimately, take that back, not ultimately, but it also derives from Phoenicia. It goes from Phoenicia to Greece. The Greeks adapt the letters, add some things, start to use letters for other things, And then the Romans adapt that, and then that gets adapted again to what we have today as the modern English alphabet. Okay. So still in book 13, he's still talking with Athena. I'm skipping a bunch. Let's see here. Page 296, Athena continuing talking to Odysseus, and she calls him a man of craft and guile. She says, very top of the page, line 329, any man, any god who met you would have to be some champion lying cheat to get past you for all round craft and guile. And what she's saying there is that you're at the top of craft and guile in being a lying cheat. Now we kind of think of lying, as a vice. That's not a good thing. But lying to save one's life in the Odyssey, that's a virtue. Okay. And Odysseus, notice, does it multiple times. Hold on a second. I need to adjust my sweatshirt here. Oh, I'm sitting outside at my dad's house. So she goes on and says, we're both old hands at the arts of intrigue here among mortal men. You're far the best at tactics, etc., etc. But you never recognized me. And she tells him, I've been with you in all your journeys, Odysseus. And now I'm here once more to weave a scheme for you and to hide the treasure trove. So she hides all the treasure that he gets from the Phaeacians. Odysseus thanks her. He says, I know you've been with me. But then around 360 and so, line 360 and so, he implies, but you abandoned me after we left Troy. He says, from then on, daughter of Zeus, I never saw you, never glimpsed you striding along my decks to ward off some disaster. So then he begs of her help from Zeus, etc. And he asks, just point blank, 372, tell me the truth now. Have I really reached the land I love? Am I really home? He's asking. He's been gone for 20 years, remember. And she says, always the same, your wary turn of mind. Now, what does she mean by wary? If somebody is wary, W-A-R-Y, what does that mean? It means they're untrusting. They're not gullible. They don't believe things that are necessarily told them. They're going to want to test and try and prove them. She says, that's why I can't forsake you in your troubles. You are so winning, so worldly wise, so self-possessed. She says, because you rely on yourself. You trust in what your own hands, your own strength, your own cunning, your own mind can do. That's why I love you so much, Odysseus. Again, remember, she's the goddess of wisdom. Okay? And there is wisdom in that being able to provide for oneself, being able to take care of oneself, etc. So she says, anyone else coming back would have, hurried straight into town, but not you. No, it's your pleasure, 381, to probe for news of them. And then she says, you must put your wife to the proof yourself, which is exactly what Agamemnon told him in Hades. Okay, when Odysseus went down there, Agamemnon told his story, what happened to him when he went home, and he says, don't let that happen to you. Okay, so she goes on and tells him what's been going on with Penelope, and says, but after you left Troy, I couldn't help you too much because Poseidon was against you. And she says, I couldn't bring myself to fight my father's brother. Okay, bear in mind, Athena is a lesser god than Poseidon and Zeus. I'm not saying she has less godlikeness. She's not as powerful. Okay. So she tells him where he is and hides the treasure and such. Tells him to, be full of courage. And in line 427 or so, they sit down to plot the death of the suitors and how Odysseus will return. And she tells him what the suitors are doing, line 431, lording over your house now, 3 whole years, courting your noble wife, offering gifts to her, So suitors did not start coming to seek Penelope's hand in marriage until after Odysseus had been gone for 17 years. We don't know how old Penelope was when she had Telemachus. I would say probably anywhere from 15 to maybe 25. So she's still relatively young, quite a bit younger than I am at least. And Odysseus says, line 438 or so, God help me. Clearly I might have died the same ignoble death as Agamemnon if you would never reveal this to me now. God is point by point. If you hadn't told me about the suitors, I might have just walked right in and they'd have, shot me in the back with an arrow or speared me or something. So he says, let's weave a scheme so I can pay them back. Okay. She tells him she'll stand beside him forever. And then she transforms him. She makes him look like a grizzled, tired out old man. She turns him essentially into a beggar. She replaces his nice clothes that he got from the Phaeacians with rags. She withers away his arms and his chest and his shoulders and his legs. His hair goes white and thin. His face goes sallow and wrinkly and saggy. And she says, go off to your swineherd. He's loyal to you. I'm going to go get Telemachus, bring him back because you're going to need him. All right. And Odysseus says, why not tell Telemachus the truth? End of the book. Why not tell him the truth? 475 or so. You know it all. Or is he too, like father, like son, condemned to hardship, roving over the barren salt sea while strangers devour our livelihood right here? He's wanting to know, has Telemachus suffered the same fate I have? Is he now condemned to travel and journey around the world and never to sit down at home? And she says, no. She says, I escorted your son, myself, to Pylos, then to Sparta. For what reason? She says, so he might make his name by sailing there. See, Telemachus, metaphorically or figuratively, left a boy. He's going to return a man. He left a boy. He returns a prince. He learns what he needs to learn while he's away so that when he returns, he is able to stand next to his father and do princely, sonly deeds, so to speak. Okay? So she transforms Odysseus, and Odysseus goes off and finds Eumaeus, the swineherd, whom we've already met because we've seen Telemachus talk with him. Okay? And we're told at the beginning of book 14 about Eumaeus that he is, of all the household of Odysseus, he cared the most for his master's worldly goods, and he was that fine, loyal man. Now, he's going to be not the only loyal one. We're going to find, other than Eumaeus and Telemachus, Odysseus will have another loyal male servant, his goat herd, and he'll have at least one more loyal female servant. She's actually servant to Penelope, Euryclea, the old nurse, okay, who we've already also seen back in the Telemachy because she helped Telemachus as he prepared for his journey. So Odysseus, book 14, goes in and meets with Eumaeus, but before he does, the dogs welcome him. Well, not quite. They run at him, snarling and barking. And we're told he knew the old trick. He gets down on his knees. This is something apparently, I think we're meant to assume this, that he kind of taught Eumaeus to teach the dogs, and the dogs leave him alone. Okay. So Eumaeus comes out, greets him, welcomes him into his home. He says, you can eat your fill of bread and water. Okay. He says, a good thing the dogs didn't kill you and such. And And then we're told page 303, line 59. The king, this is Odysseus, delighted to be so well received. My host, may Zeus and the other gods give you your heart's desire for the royal welcome you have shown me here. Now, royal welcome obviously has two meanings. One, that's a Zeus kind of subtly, Odysseus kind of subtly hinting, you've welcomed royalty here, but he's also telling him, you follow Xenia perfectly. You are treating a worn out old beggar as if I am royalty. See, that's what that law of hospitality implies. You know, we're going to hear it. We've heard it before. We'll hear it again. The gods, we are told in Homer, sometimes visit people in the guise of men. So you don't know if that beggar who is knocking on your door, you don't know if that beggar who's, holding a sign at the entry to Interstate 24 or something, or on Old Fort Parkway or wherever, is a human beggar or a god in human's form. Even in not in the Gospels, in the letters of the New Testament, either St. Paul or St. Peter says, that men have attended angels unawares. That is, that angels, according to the New Testament author, whichever one it is, that angels sometimes appear as men. For what purpose? To see how they treat strangers. That's that old Greek/Indo-European idea coming in. I'm not saying it's not divinely inspired or anything like that, okay? So, and then we're told, for the first time we hear this in the book, this is book 14, line 61 to 3. And you replied, Eumaeus, loyal swineherd. Okay? Who's the you? And you replied, Eumaeus, royal swineherd. Whoever the narrator is, it's like they're directing the tale from this point on to Eumaeus. And what it really comes across as we read now from here through the end of book 24, is that Odysseus is now telling the tale. See, before it was just this kind of disembodied narrator, but now it's like Odysseus is telling the tale, okay? Another thing, other than books 1 through 4, 5 through 12, and even part of 13, all occur where? Well, kind of off in this almost Neverland, this other world, this fairy world, this world of fantasy and imagination. But where are we now? We're at Odysseus. We're not quite at his physical home, but we're at his home country, okay? So that everything that now occurs in the real world. It occurs in the real world of real human flesh and blood. I mean, how many of us have seen a Cyclops? How many of us have seen a Calypso or a Circe or, Scylla and Charybdis? How many of us have been down to the dead per se? That's all otherworldly stuff. So, where was I? He picked up line 61 to 3. He says, and you replied, Eumaeus, loyal swineherd, it's wrong, my friend, to send any stranger packing, even one who arrives in worse shape than you. Every stranger and beggar comes from Zeus, and whatever scrap they get from the likes of us, they'll find it welcome. So this is Odysseus telling us, I think, that Odysseus told Eumaeus, may Zeus and the other gods give you your heart's desire for this royal welcome. And you replied, kind of like to me, well, here's why I gave you that royal welcome. Every stranger and beggar comes from Zeus, and whatever scrap they get from the likes of us, they'll find it welcome. Now, the they can refer to Zeus and the other gods, or it can just refer to the beggar. And then he goes on, Eumaeus goes on, line 70. But my old king, the gods, they must have blocked his journey home. He'd have treated me well, he would, with a house, a plot of land, a wife he'd gladly prize, goods that a kind lord will give a household hand who labors for him hard, whose work the gods have sped. Have sped there means have blessed, have made prosper. Just as they speed the work I labor at all day. My master, I tell you, would have repaid me well if he'd grown old right here, but now he's dead. If only Helen and her kind, he means deceitful women, had died out, brought to her knees, etc., etc. Okay? So he goes on, tells Odysseus to eat up. He slaughters a pig for him. He says, you're well, kind of like you're owed a pig, because the suitors are getting all the best hogs and stuff. And he says, that they're going to get what they have coming to them. He hopes. So beginning around line, 116 or so, he lists the kind of, what's the word I want? Cattle and sheep and goats and all that kind of stuff that Odysseus has. And this is a kind of a very, very small epic catalog. Usually the epic catalog is of armies and soldiers and armor and stuff. And this is, kind of domestic stuff, okay? 135 or so. So Odysseus asks Eumaeus, who is the man who bought you with his goods, the master of such vast riches, powerful as you say? Because Eumaeus hasn't said, I serve Odysseus. So who owns you? Who do you serve? You tell me he died defending Agamemnon's honor. What's his name? I might know him. Zeus would know, and the other deathless gods if I ever saw him. If I bring you any news, tell me who he is. Maybe I've seen him. So Eumaeus tells him his master was Odysseus. And Odysseus says, 176 or so, on my oath, I swear Odysseus is on his way. Reward for such good news? Let me have it the moment he sets foot in his own house. Dress me in shirt and cloak and handsome clothes. I swear to you on the gods, he's on his way. And when he arrives, then you can give me a cloak and etc. I swear by Zeus, a few lines down, the first of all the gods, by this table of hospitality here, my host, by Odysseus' hearth, where I've come for help, and all will come to pass, I swear, exactly as I say. So he swears by the chief of the gods, he swears by the table of hospitality. And what that really means is he kind of swears by this whole custom of hospitality. And he swears by Odysseus' hearth. See, the hearth is the center of the home. It's the center of the palace. Why? Because it's the place from which all nourishment flows. Okay? That's why in the Christian church, the altar in a church is the hearth of the church. It's the place from which all nourishment flows. Nourishment in the sense of, it's where the Bible is placed. It's where a cross is. It's where, if it's a kind of a Eucharistic church, it's where the Eucharist or the communion meal is dispensed from ultimately. And he goes on and says, 189, Odysseus will return. He will come home and take revenge on any man who offends his wedded wife and princely son. Eumaeus doesn't believe me. He's not coming home. Think about it. He's been gone for 20 years. They've probably heard stories. Oh, yeah, he's coming. He's coming back. He hasn't come back. Okay? If you're familiar with J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, what is the third volume of The Lord of the Rings called? The Return of the King. What is in Jewish scripture, who's the Messiah? He's the king, the son of David. Why do observant Orthodox Jews look forward to him? because he will be the return of the king. Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings is the return of the king. If you were a real diehard today, British person, and you believed in British mythology, who is the king? You kind of still look forward to returning, because according to the myth, he will return when Britain has its greatest need. Arthur. So there's this motif that runs throughout literature of the absent king who will come to reclaim his throne, to reclaim his honor, to reclaim what is his. Okay? So Eumaeus, says, I mourn for him, Odysseus, but, there's still Penelope and there's still Telemachus. They're here and now. Odysseus is in, okay? So he asks Odysseus, not knowing who he is, to tell a story. Where have you been? What's been going on with you? Who are you? What he doesn't ask what his name is. So Odysseus, notice, tells him a story. Says he's from Crete, says he fought alongside the guys at Troy, etc., befriended Odysseus, helped him on his way, Eumaeus, likes the story. Odysseus told him, Odysseus will return. Eumaeus says, page 313, line 411, your story's great. There's one part that's not right. The part about Odysseus coming back, you'll never persuade me. Okay. And then he says, bottom of that page, 313, line 439, never for that will I respect you, treat you kindly. Okay. Talking about, let me back up to 439, 437. So you old misery, he's calling Odysseus old misery. So you, seeing a god has led you here to me, don't try to charm me now. Don't spellbind me with lies. That is, don't try to make me believe this lie that Odysseus is returning. Never for that will I respect you, treat you kindly. So why is he going to treat him kindly then? It's my fear of Zeus, god of guests, and because I pity you. Well, why does he pity him? Because anybody could be in this old beggar's shoes. Anybody can experience what this old beggar is experiencing, Eumaeus is suggesting. Okay? And Odysseus replies, top of 314. Good God, what a dark, suspicious heart you have inside you. Well, what did Athena say to him? You are wary and crafty, which kind of meant, you're suspicious. Not even my oath can win you over, make you see the light. Come, strike a bargain. So let the gods witness our pact. If your master returns here to your house, dress me in shirt and cloak, send me off to Deucalion at once, the place I long to be. But if your master doesn't return, set your men on me, throw me off a cliff. Okay? And Eumaeus replies, and this is going to be important because we're going to hear about somebody who does almost exactly what Eumaeus talks about here. He says, if first I took you under my roof, I treated you kindly as my guest, then cut you down and robbed you of your life, how keen I'd be to say my prayers to Zeus. If I were to bring you into my house and treat you as a guest, and then I killed you, how would Zeus respond? Well, we're going to hear later on, I think it's in book 22, 23, 24, something like that. Hercules did that. Heracles, as he's called. I think the only change is, and we'll refer to it when I get to it, I think Hercules is welcomed into somebody's house and he kills his host. Okay. So we get told, Eumaeus, properly cuts up the feast. He offers portions to the gods and such. He lifts up a prayer. And let's see here. Odysseus goes to sleep. Book 15. Athena wakes up Telemachus, tells him it's time for you to head home. And she tells him about the ambush that Antinous has set in place on the sea. So she tells him, what to do. You get off the boat and then send your ship around. Okay, line 45 or so. Make your way to the swineherd first and charge your pigs. True to you as always. Sleep the night there. Send him to town to tell Penelope that you're home, etc., etc. Okay, and she's doing this for a reason. She wants Telemachus to meet his father before anybody else other than Eumaeus. Okay, so Telemachus tells Menelaus, "I need to go home." They see an omen. Okay, and top of 325, Helen tells them what the omen means. Just as the eagle swooped down from the crags where it was born and bred, just as it snatched that goose fattened up for the kill inside the house, this was a dream she had. Just so, after many trials and roving long and hard, Odysseus will descend on his house, take refuge until he's home already, sowing seeds of ruin for that whole crowd of suitors. So she says, I had a dream, and here's what the dream means. Okay. So Telemachus goes home. And let's see here. Pages 330, 331 in book 15. Eumaeus explains to Odysseus that Laertes, Odysseus' father, is still alive. He mentions, that he doesn't get anything. Eumaeus, doesn't get anything from Penelope because all the food, all the stuff that he sends down there is taken by the suitors and such. Okay. So we get to skip the end of the book and go to book 16. Telemachus shows up. The dogs run up. Notice they don't growl and bark at him because they recognize him. Okay. And Odysseus sees him and he calls Eumaeus and says, here's a friend of yours, because the dogs aren't barking. And Eumaeus addresses Telemachus. You're home, Telemachus. Okay. And Telemachus says, yes. And we're told, page 339, very bottom of the page, out of 47 or 48, as Telemachus and Eumaeus come into the house, Odysseus rises to yield his seat. He's going to give Telemachus a place to sit. There are 2 chairs in the house. But the son on his part waved him back. He kind of, no, go back. Stay where you are, stranger. I know we can find another seat somewhere here on our farm, and here's the man to fetch it. So Odysseus sits down on the chair. Eumaeus, after he's done what he's going to do, will sit down on another chair. And what is it he's going to do? So Odysseus sits down, and now for the prince, the swineherd, line 53, strewed a bundle of fresh green brushwood, topped it off with sheepskin, and there the true son of Odysseus took his place. He piles up a bunch of twigs and sticks and throws a sheepskin over it for Telemachus to sit on. Okay, now again, who's Telemachus? He's the prince, the future king of Ithaca. He's sitting on a bundle of wood while a beat up, straggled, old beggar sits in a fine chair. And I think that's one reason why he's called the true son of Odysseus. See, the true son there doesn't mean only that he's the literal, genetic, biological son. It means this is how a true prince, a true king acts. This is another sign of hospitality, of Xenia, okay? So Eumaeus suggests that Telemachus lend aid to the stranger, and Telemachus says, how can I? The suitors, they're too strong. I don't want to send them down there. They'll harm him, etc. And Odysseus steps in. 111. Would I were young as you to match my spirit now, or I were the son of great Odysseus, or the king himself returned from all his roving, there's still room for hope. He might still, come back. Then let some foreigner lop my head off if I fail to march right into Odysseus's royal halls and kill them all. If I were you, that's what I would do. And what if I went down crushed by their numbers, I fighting alone? And what if I died and they all killed me? I'd rather die cut down in my own house than have to look on at their outrage day by day. Odysseus is teaching. He's teaching Telemachus what it means to be heroic, what it means to have honor, what it means to show loyalty to his father and his home. He says, there are some things we're dying for. Family honor is one of them. Guests treated to blows, men dragging the serving women through the noble house, exploiting them, that is, raping them, all no shame. And Telemachus says, you're right. You're right. Now let me tell you the whole story. It's not that all our people have turned against me, keen for a showdown. He says, end of that little speech, but all lies in the lap of the gods. That is, it'll take the gods to help do this. Okay? So, Athena comes. Odysseus sees her. Telemachus doesn't. She gives a sign with her brows. Again, Odysseus sees it. And she tells Odysseus, line 188, royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, old campaigner, now is the time to tell your son the truth. Hold nothing back. Why? You guys have got to plot your return. She says, I myself won't lag behind you long. I'm blazing for a battle. And so she strokes him with her wand, and he fills out to what he ought to be. And I don't know, what your mental image of Odysseus is. But, I would think of, if I were thinking of an actor, of somebody like, a Chris Hemsworth, but with kind of darker, olivey skin, dark hair, okay? So he doesn't look like Thor, but more like a Greek god. But he needs to be really muscly, not muscle bound like Schwarzenegger was, but really built as somebody who relies and has relied on his muscles all his life, or at the very least for the last 20 years, okay? And she strokes him and he looks, magnificent, and Odysseus comes in and Telemachus is like, what happened? You're not the man I just saw. Surely you are a god who rules the vaulting skies, around line 205. And Odysseus says, 209. No, I'm not a god. 211. Why confuse me with one who never dies? And there's a reason why he says that. The gods are very jealous of their divinity. They are angered, let me put it that way. Whenever a human, refers to another human as being godlike. See, they don't strike down the person who said it. They strike down the person who draws the comparison of being godlike. They, cut them down because they don't want humans to be compared to the gods. So Odysseus said, no. I am your father. And then the Odysseus you wept for all your days, you bore a world of pain. And with those words, Odysseus kissed his son, and the tears streamed down his cheeks and wet the ground. But Telemachus doesn't believe him. Okay? So Telemachus didn't believe him. Eumaeus doesn't believe him. When Penelope's told, she doesn't believe him. Okay? Prove it. Prove it. And Odysseus says, no other Odysseus 232 will return to you. That man and I are one, the man you see here after many hardships, endless wanderings, and after many years. Kind of interesting. When I first arrived here, I'm at my dad's house, I told you. My dad didn't recognize me. I went and stood in front of his bed, and he said, can you tell me where Ted is? And I said, yes, I can. It's me. And one of my sisters was there and pointed that out. And once I said that, and once my sister said that, his eyes kind of opened up. And from that point on, he knew who I was. So Odysseus now says, I've come home to native ground at last. My changing, that is how you saw me before, work of Athena. Okay? And Odysseus sits down, and Telemachus throws his arms. So notice, he doesn't have to prove it. He doesn't, for example, how does he prove to Penelope he is who he says he is? How does Euryclea, the old nurse, recognize him? They see the scar on his leg. Okay? Telemachus doesn't know about that scar. He wouldn't recognize it. So Telemachus wants to know how. And Odysseus says, Athena and such. So Odysseus wants to get to the point of the matter. How many suitors are there? What are we up against? Okay. He's thinking, he's planning. He's called many times throughout the book the master tactician. So he's thinking tactics. He's thinking how can 1, 2, okay, let's throw in old Eumaeus. How can 3 of us take on all these suitors? So how many suitors are there? And we're told on page 346 how many there are. And if you add those numbers all together, you come up with 114. 114 suitors. So when we get to the end of book 23, maybe book 22, Odysseus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, and Philotius, I can't remember his name, the goatherd, they kill them all. Okay? Four men. So, Odysseus says, when Telemachus says, how can we do this? We can't kill all these men. Odysseus says, 289, let me tell you, bear it in mind now, listen to me closely. Will Athena, flanked by Father Zeus, do for the 2 of us? Do we really need more champions than that? Really? I mean, Athena, she's also like the female goddess of war, female equivalent of Ares, as well as being goddess of wisdom. And Zeus, will they be good enough for us? And he's like, oh yeah, got covered. Okay. So Odysseus tells him the plan. You're going to go back. Okay. Eumaeus will lead me into town earlier. The men will say all kinds of rotten things about me. They'll probably try and kick me. They'll try and hit me. I'll let them. I'll take it all. Okay. He said, and there'll be a point when we're in the hall. I'll give you a nod. And at that point, you take all the weapons that are in the hall and you take them up to the storeroom and you lock it up. Okay. And somebody's going to explain, well, why are you doing this? And you say, well, when you guys get drunk, it's probably good not to have sharp things around because you might start killing each other. This probably, although also, I think, might be an Indo-European idea. We know the Indo-Europeans made and drank beer and mead, okay? But the same idea shows up in the Old English heroic epic Beowulf. This idea that you shouldn't have, weapons around where you have a bunch of soldiers who are getting drunk all the time. Okay? He says, but leave a couple of swords for us so that we can take care of them. Let's see here. He says we need to find out which of the women servants are loyal to us. Okay. And then he talks about, the farmers and the people outside the palace, but we'll take care of that later. Let's see here. Where do I want to pick up? Telemachus makes his way back. Before Telemachus gets back to the palace, word is brought to the suitors that Telemachus is back. Antinous is very upset. Okay. And he's thinking, the gods must have blessed him. The gods have helped him. He calls him 4, 10, 11, 12, 13. Line 414, the clever little schemer. He does have his skills. Well, that's kind of like he's saying, like father, like son. The crafty old tactician, the clever little schemer. He's going to be just like his father. Okay. So he says, we need to strike him down. We'll seize his estates, etc., etc. Amphinomus rises and says, we can't do that. 444, I've no desire to kill Telemachus. It's a terrible thing to shed the blood of kings. Let's wait. Let's find out what the will of the gods is. The other suitors agree. The herald Medon overhears the schemes, cries out, against Antinous. Let's see. Telemachus comes in. He sees Eumaeus. Now we can skip that. Go to book 17. Telemachus goes into town says to present himself to his mother. He goes into the hall. A lot here to skip. Telemachus meets up with his mother. He tells her why he left. He says that he learned from Menelaus that, as of a few years ago at least, Odysseus was still alive. He tells him about being captured, tells her that Odysseus was being held captive by Calypso and such. And 161, 2, 3. Okay. He's not alone with Penelope. We're told the godlike seer Theoclymenus added firmly, noble lady. So godlike seer. Seer means he's a prophet. He can see in the future. That's why he's godlike. The gods can see in the future. Theoclymenus says, noble lady, wife of Laertes, son Odysseus, Menelaus can have no perfect revelations. Mark my words. I will make you a prophecy, quite precise, and I'll hold nothing back. I swear by Zeus, the first of all the gods, by this table of hospitality here, my host, same kind of oath that Odysseus swore, by Odysseus' hearth where I've come for help, the same three things that Odysseus swore to Laertes, to Eumaeus. I swear Odysseus is on native soil. That is, Odysseus is in Ithaca, here and now. Poised around the prowl, learning of these rank crimes, he's sowing seeds of ruin for all your suitors. So clear, so true, that bird sign I saw as I sat on the bent ship and sounded out the future to the prince. So now Theoclymenus has said, he's back, he's planning. Penelope doesn't believe him. Okay, skip a bunch more. Odysseus makes his way into town, dressed in rags, looking totally like a beggar. And this is one of the most touching scenes, well, I think at least, as a dog lover, this is one of the most touching scenes in the entire story. Page 363, line 318, 317. Now, as they walked on, the dog that lay there lifted up his muzzle, pricked his ears. This is Eumaeus leading Odysseus in his old beggar form. It was Argos, long enduring Odysseus's dog, So the dog is at least 20 years old. It was Argos' long-enduring Odysseus' dog. He trained as a puppy once, but little joy he got, since all too soon he shipped to sacred Troy. I kind of take it that means he had him as a puppy. He trained him, probably 8 months old, maybe a year at most, and then he ships off to Troy. So Argos is probably about 21 years old. Now that is really, really old for a dog, especially a hunting dog. So this is a large breed. Okay? But now with his master gone, he lay there, cast away, ignored. He's been abandoned. On piles of dung from mules and cattle, heaps collecting out before the gates till Odysseus's serving men could cart it off to manure the king's estates. So notice, he sleeps before the gates of the palace. Why? Why would he do that? Well, what is the colloquialism we say about dogs? Man's best friend. In fact, I just saw a headline the other day. Burial somewhere, I think in southern Russia, somewhere, it might have been in the steppes of Russia. Human burial with a dog. And the burial dates from something like 9,500 or 7,500 BC. Okay? The dog is waiting. It's like, get on YouTube and do a YouTube video search of dog soldier reunion, something like that. And you'll see all kinds of videos of these soldiers who returned from active duty, who returned from being away for several years, and the dog just goes crazy. That's Argos. But Argos is 21 years old now, and he can't go crazy. He doesn't have the energy. Look what it said. So he's lying on piles of manure, infested with ticks, half dead from neglect. Here lay the hound, old Argos. But the moment he sensed Odysseus standing by, he thumped his tail, nuzzling low, and his ears dropped. Though he had no strength to drag himself an inch toward his master, Odysseus glances and flicks away a tear, hiding it from Eumaeus, diverting his friend in a hasty offhand way. Strange, Eumaeus, look, a dog like this lying here on a dunghill. What handsome lines. But I can't say for sure if he had the running speed to match his looks, or he was only the sort that gentry spoil at table. Show dogs, masters pamper for their points. And Eumaeus explains. Eumaeus knows who the dog is. Here it's all too true. Here's the dog of a man who died in foreign parts. Eumaeus still thinks Odysseus is dead. But if he had now the form and flair he had in his glory days, as Odysseus left him, or Eumaeus says that in case anybody overhears the conversation. If he had now the form and flair he had in his glory days, as Odysseus left him sailing off to Troy, you'd be amazed to see such speed, such strength. No quarry chased in the deepest, darkest woods could ever slip this hound. A champion tracker too. But he's run out of luck now, poor fellow. His master's dead and gone, so far from home. And the heartless women tend him not at all. Slaves with their lords no longer there to crack the whip, lose all zest to perform their duties well. Zeus, the old thunderer, robs a man of half his virtue the day the yoke clamps round his neck. And with that, they go into the palace, and we're told, but the dark shadow of death closed down on Argos's eyes the instant he saw Odysseus, 20 years away. He kind of lifts his head. He sees his master. And he gives his last dying breath. That is an image of loyalty. Okay? And notice it's the dog. It's not the suitors. Okay. Odysseus comes in. Telemachus tells the swineherd to take as much meat as his hands could hold to the beggar, Odysseus. Okay. He does. Odysseus offers a prayer to Zeus. Okay. Athena goes around and says, go to Zeus, to Odysseus says, go gather crusts from all the suitors. Test them. She wants Odysseus to see, do they follow the custom of Xenia? Okay. And Antinous proves what an ass he is. Your Highness swineherd, you may ask, why drag this to town? Why did you bring this piece of human filth here? Okay. And he says, 430, 425 or so, Eumaeus, responding to Antinous, says, a beggar? Who'd invite a beggar to bleed his household white? You of all the suitors are always roughest on the servants of our king, on me most of all. Not that I care, so long as the queen, his wife's queen, is still alive. And Telemachus, just don't talk to me about him being a beggar. You live here. You eat all this food. You are a beggar. Okay? And Telemachus tells Eumaeus to stop, and then he turns at Antinous and says, how kind you are to me, Antinous, kind as a father to his son, encouraging me to send a stranger packing from my house with a harsh command. I'd never do it, God forbid. Take and give to the beggar. I don't grudge it. I'd even urge you on. That is, what I'm asking you to give him isn't yours. It's mine. No scruples now. Never fear your gifts will upset my mother. No such qualm could enter that head of yours. And Antinous spouts off. But everybody else does give to him. The other suitors do give to Zeus, okay? To Odysseus. Odysseus goes up to Antinous and says, 458, give me a morsel, friend. You're hardly the worst decaying here, it seems, the noblest one, in fact. You look like a king to me. So you should give a bigger crust than the rest, and I will sing your praises across all the earth. Because you are so well off, you should give more, Odysseus tells him. Why are you being so stingy? I'm hearing something in the trees, and I don't know if it's rain or not. Okay. I too once lived in a lofty house that men admired, he says. Okay. And Antinous responds to him, essentially says to get out of here. And Odysseus says, line 500, pity, pity, no sense in your head to match your handsome looks. You'll grudge your servant a pinch of salt from your own larder, you who lounge at the next man's board, but lack the heart to tear a crust of bread and hand it on to me, though there's God's plenty here. You won't even give willingly a pinch of salt from your own larder, and yet you won't give anything from somebody else's place. Okay? And Antinous throws a stool at him and hits Odysseus square in the back, just under his right shoulder. And we're told Odysseus thinks, should I strike him now? But he doesn't. Instead, he says, 5:17 or so, hear me out, you lords who court the noble queen. I must say what the heart inside me urges. There's nothing to groan about, no hurt when a man takes a blow as he fights to save his own possessions, cattle or shining flocks. Now, Odysseus just very subtly told them something. This is my stuff. This is my food. These are my flocks. But Antinous struck me all because of my good-for-nothing belly. So he then, to make sure they don't understand what he just said, he says, but I'm not the king. I don't own all this. I'm just hungry. That curse that makes such pain for us poor men, that is, the belly. But if beggars have their gods and furies too, in other words, we can pray and we can call down curses, let Antinous meet his death before he meets his bride. See, Antinous wants to be the suitor to marry Penelope. He's the chief of the suitors. He's the leader of the suitors. Okay? So they kind of go back and forth. Penelope hears about what Antinous has said, and she says, oh, if only the gods would answer my prayers, and Odysseus would return. Okay? And Penelope goes on and says, but Antinous is the worst of all, page 370. He's Black Death itself. Here's this luckless stranger wandering down the halls begging scraps. You know, the rest I'll give him his food. And what does Antinous do? He throws a footstool at him. Okay? Eumaeus says, you need to welcome this man in this hall. You know, he can tell a story like nobody else. Penelope says, call him in. And again, she offers another prayer, line 599. Dear God, if only Odysseus came back home to native soil now, he and his son would avenge the outrage of these men like that. And it's almost like she snaps her finger. Okay.